Hello there and welcome to today's video in which I'm going to be reading through the interview in TES magazine with Uta Frith, who's a world-renowned expert in autism. The article has received a huge amount of backlash from the autistic community, and rightly so, and I won't be reading the whole article because we'll be here all day, so I'm just going to pick up on some points as we go through, so let's get started. I feel more and more under pressure to really think about this problem, says Dame Uta Frith, referring to the exponential rise in the number of young people being diagnosed with autism. So Uta is starting, as she means to go on here, by framing autism as a problem to be fixed. And it's just so frustrating, isn't it, when we think about all of the young people who are now getting a diagnosis of autism, which will inevitably make their lives easier in terms of self-understanding and accommodations in life. And it's just, I don't know, it boggles my brain that she's framing it as a problem. Autism is a neurodevelopmental disorder, which is to say that there is some pathology in the brain existing from birth. Some people object to the word disorder, but that's what I would call it. So it's very clear that Uta sees autism as a disorder, and this is of course a very neurotypical way of looking at autism, which views autistic characteristics as deficits. But we know that autism is increasingly being understood as a neurotype. So Uta goes on to state essentially that she no longer believes that autism is a spectrum, and she says, I think at least we have two big subgroups: the people who are diagnosed in early childhood, usually before age 3 or age 5, depending on things like their intellectual abilities and language, and another group diagnosed much later. This population is different. It's made up of a lot of adolescents, and among them a lot of young women. These are people without intellectual impairments who are perfectly able to communicate verbally and non-verbally, but who might feel highly anxious in social situations. They are perhaps characterised mainly by a sort of hypersensitivity. Now, I think the people in the second group really do have problems. I would definitely not say that they are making it up, but I would say that these are problems that can perhaps be treated much better than under the label of autism. I would fight for that label to be limited to the first group. Crikey, she couldn't make it any more clear, really, that she doesn't believe that very many people getting diagnosed with autism later in life are autistic. We are hypersensitive. I'd agree, I am hypersensitive to a whole lot of stuff in life. Often noises are too loud, lights are too bright, food can be too crunchy. You know, I absolutely would say that I am a hypersensitive person. But what about our communication differences, for instance? Why do we feel a need to get immersed in special interest? I think it's just really lazy to assume that our experience of autism is only limited to social anxiety and being really sensitive to things. You know, we are absolutely multifaceted human beings with a whole plethora of autistic traits. So then Uta is asked the question, could an explanation for later diagnosis be that some people, particularly girls, are able to successfully mask their symptoms? She responds, the masking idea has no scientific basis, yet everybody, including the researchers and the clinicians, have been enamoured with this idea. It's understandable because they listen to the lived experiences of people who say they've been masking, that they spend their time imitating what neurotypical people do, and they're exhausted every day because of this. So the harm is not the masking, but the exhaustion afterwards. I can't quite understand that because exhaustion could arise from lots of other causes. I expect we could say we are all masking all the time, trying to adapt to our society's norms. So from this point of view, I'm very critical of this idea. So the harm is not the masking, but the exhaustion afterwards. Has Uta even spoken to an autistic person who masks? Because I can tell you that I'm experiencing all sorts of stuff while I'm masking in the moment. I'm having to analyse everything that's going on externally, analyse everything that's going on internally. So to say that masking in the moments isn't harmful is utterly ridiculous, and I can't help but take offence to this, particularly as this is being said by a supposed expert in autism. Yes, masking is exhausting afterwards. I've had to go to bed an untold amount of times in my life after working or going to a social event, but masking is also exhausting in the moments. And exhaustion could arise from lots of other causes and not masking. I think we know our brains and our bodies well enough to know what the cause of exhaustion is. You know, it just hasn't arrived by osmosis. You know, masking is exhausting. And I do agree with Uta actually that everybody masks to some degree, even neurotypical people, because very often a person will have their work persona who is a little different from their home persona, again, different from their social persona. But we're only talking about, you know, slight shifts in personality here. But an autistic person who is masking, in very many cases, has taken on a personality who is fundamentally different to who they are, because we have to put on a display of confidence, of somebody who really kind of gets the world and gets other people. And if that isn't intrinsic to who you are inside, that is exhausting. It's like putting on a performance every day. I'm sure actors feel something similar in that they're on alert while they're performing a play, say, and they feel exhausted afterwards. And, you know, there are parallels there with autistic masking, I would say. Okay, so I'm getting quite annoyed now. Is there a cultural bias against identifying girls and women as autistic? Have they been unjustly overlooked? I don't think so. We know, for example, that psychopathy is overwhelmingly male. Do we ask whether psychopathic girls have been overlooked? I haven't seen anything like that. There are just diseases that are more common in males and diseases that are more common in females. What's with the whataboutery here? And the word diseases. What are you thinking? Why is Uta so resistant to the idea or the fact that there are more autistic women and girls out there than previously thought? Why is this such a problem for her? I just don't get it. Okay, so moving on. Asperger's syndrome was introduced as an official diagnostic term in the 90s as a way of including people who would not fit the original autism description. These were people who had fluent language, sometimes a high IQ, and yet still had very typical symptoms of autism. This was a small group, but once the label was introduced, parents who wanted their children diagnosed were almost all pushing for a diagnosis of Asperger's syndrome. The label has acquired great cachet, perhaps because it was associated with certain figures from history and some famous scientists. Perhaps the label held hope that even if a child needed significant supports, they might have hidden superpowers that could enable them to do well in certain niche occupations. Crikey, where do I start with this? Bearing in mind that Uta is a researcher and was a researcher and not a diagnostician, where is she getting this information from? Because it sounds like anecdotal stories she's been told that parents have wanted their children to be diagnosed with Asperger's. And I'm finding this whole article is reading like autism trope bingo because we've got the superpower word here, we've had disease, we've had disorder, we've had problems, so let's see what others come up. These days, many people are self-diagnosing before they are assessed. I've heard from clinicians that they feel themselves to be under severe pressure to give the diagnosis. If the person has waited months or even years and feels absolutely sure that they're autistic. Well, of course we're going to self-diagnose because You have to self-diagnose before you go for a diagnosis. And I would say that about any kind of medical condition as well. You know, I had to self-diagnose myself with MCAS and POTS before I could get a diagnosis of MCAS and POTS. And it's a similar process with autism. We have to self-diagnose before we go for a diagnosis. And because we're autistic people, we do the work, we do the research. We spend weeks, months, sometimes years in researching autism in order to fully feel that we ourselves qualify for a diagnosis or meet the diagnostic criteria. So of course we feel absolutely sure that we're autistic when we go for an assessment. I fear that the way assessments are made now may not be quite right. I get the sense that people are relying too much on detailed interviews that provide a lot of subjective experience rather than an objective clinical observation. For example, observing the flow of a conversation to spot indicators of poor reciprocal interaction, say in eye contact or body language. I would guess these are things that are difficult to mask. Honestly, this article is sending me bonkers. When somebody has been masking for years or decades, of course they've learned through that whole time to observe others' body language, to observe how they use their eye contacts in order to relate to other people, communicate with other people, and we copy all of this behaviour. So this, in essence, forms part of our mask. Yes, I can make eye contact with other people for short amounts of time. I can't do it for any extended amount of time because I can't concentrate on what either I'm saying or what the other person's saying. But I've learned to be able to make brief eye contact with people. And I've learned through observing people for decades how to mirror body language. Uta is showing no understanding of masking here whatsoever. I fear there also isn't enough attention being paid to what I would call the contraindicators. To me, for example, it's a contraindicator for the diagnosis of autism if the person can interact smoothly with you in conversation. If a person is autistic, the conversation will often feel stilted or abrupt. So Uta couldn't make it any more clear here that she would not believe for a second that somebody like me is autistic, because I'm able to have a conversation with other people that flows fairly easily. It's just so offensive. So Uta then goes on to discuss autism in children. We don't really know what causes the sensory issues, and I think people love the idea of being able to do something about it. Giving a child ear defenders feels intuitive, it feels plausible, but I'm sceptical. As far as I know, there hasn't been any research into finding out whether these sensory adjustments actually improve lives. I've no idea whether it's good for the child or not. It may feel good to them, but not actually be good. So if a child is struggling with sensory issues around noise, she would be reluctant to give them some ear defenders. This just doesn't make sense to me. Why can't we accommodate people for their needs? Instead of this a ludicrous idea that everybody should just be treated the same, which is what, I'm getting from this. For me, there's just very little sensitivity or empathy shown for an autistic child who is really struggling within a noisy setting, for example. And she says that we don't know if these sensory adjustments actually improve lives. Talk to autistic people, they will tell you that many adjustments like this can improve our lives. No, they don't work for all of us, but certainly very many of us find ear defenders really, really useful. Our cultural understanding of the concept of autism, which has changed so much, is not just affecting ordinary people who might be interested in who they are, it equally affects teachers and other professionals, including me. Including me. For me, this is one of the most revealing things that Uta says in this whole interview, and I can't help but wonder if her ego has kind of got caught up somewhere in the research she's done in autism. And obviously she's a pioneer of research in her fields, but I do wonder if she's worried about her legacy and her contributions to the field, and perhaps they'll get lost in history somehow. But our understanding of all sorts of conditions evolves through time and through more research, and you have to go where the evidence takes you. So I do wonder if Uta is just really resistant to change here. I've been quite swept up by the autism spectrum idea, and it's only in the past 10 years or so that I've felt things have gone too far. And very slowly I've come to say, no, this is not right. So there we have it. Uta says things have gone too far. And I'd say from her perspective, many of us who are self-realised or formally diagnosed autistic people aren't actually autistic. We are perhaps, I don't know, hypersensitive or have some kind of social anxiety or something else maybe, but it's not autism. And it's things like this that cause a real damage to the autistic community, because it's no surprise that the usual suspects in online media have picked up this story and ran with it. And of course, we know that autism is under huge political scrutiny at the moment, and certainly in recent years. And what really annoys me is that Uta knows this. She knows the damage that she'll be causing with this article, but she still went ahead with it anyway. And for that, I'm just so disappointed. And it just seems so anti-women. We know that there's a lost generation out there of women and people assigned female at birth who are only now finding out about their neurodivergence. And for Uta to say to us, essentially, you're not autistic, it's something else, is it's just maddening. I really, really wish she hadn't have done this article. It almost taps into the whole hysteria thing again for me. I remember a couple of years ago, there was a Lancet article and it was going on about the over-medicalisation of HRT in menopause. And again, it was utterly offensive nonsense, because finally women are now researching and advocating for themselves in going to their doctors and telling them, I need to be put on HRT. And a large part of this is because of people like Davina McCall, who made this groundbreaking documentary, and it helped me feel empowered to go and see my own GP about HRT. And to think that this is over-medicalisation when before we were given HRT, we were given antidepressants. It's absolute nonsense. And again, this feels really similar because it's inferring that women are all hysterical because we now all believe that we're autistic or have ADHD. And interestingly, Uta gave no mention of ADHD in this entire interview, when we know that it's a common co-occurring condition of autism, and also the traits of autism and the traits of ADHD often conflict or even kind of cancel each other out. So the very fact that this hasn't even been referenced in this article is just mind-blowing to me. So ultimately, I think this article is just culture wars fodder, really, and I'm pleased to see that there has been an enormous amount of pushback to this article, and I know that TES have put out another article from another specialist in autism, Dr. Sue Franklin. Again, somebody who's not autistic, interestingly, but what frustrates me is that, of course, the original article gets all of the press attention, but the second article refuting Uta's ideas, well, of course, it won't receive anything because it doesn't suit the current agenda. So yeah, there we have it. There are my thoughts on this article. I'm just really, really angry about it. And I think also all of this really evidences why it is so important for actually autistic people to be involved with research into autism, because to not have a personal insight into what the experience of autism feels like, for me just feels like there's something missing there. We need that kind of fundamental understanding about autism. So absolutely, we need more autistic researchers. If you haven't seen or haven't read the interview, I will link it down below. But I would say, as a counter to this nonsense, go and watch the amazing New Scientist interview with Gina Rippon, who again is an autism expert. She specialises in autism in women and girls, and it's just like a massive hug. So I'll link that down below as well. So yeah, be sure to watch that if you do read the article, because I think you'll need it as a kind of counterbalance, really. So anyway, I would love to know what you thought of the TES interview with Uta Frith. There are various aspects I haven't had time to pick out in this video, so by all means feel free to leave any other elements that I haven't talked about down below and how you feel about them. So thank you for watching. Give it a like if you got this far. An orange heart would always be appreciated if you don't know what to write in comments. And yeah, I'll see you again soon.